T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Launch Sequence Podcast, episode 57, coming up after Alien Week, Invictus Week, and then Alien Week, and we've got a little episode planned to cover that, to celebrate a little bit of the cultures, the aliens, the languages, and all the work that's gone into developing that for Star Citizen. And with me to cover that are two of the experts, Jale and Chris Harrow. Welcome, guys, and thank you for coming on the show this week.
Jason.
So these two know a lot about the alien cultures in the game, way more than I do. So instead of doing my own introductions or anything like that, I'm going to let you guys tell everybody what exactly it is you do, what brings you into this part of the game, and why you decided to come in to talk about it.
Well, I'm Jale. I cracked open the Xian language guide PDF when it came out and never looked back. I have a little YouTube channel where I do post random things that I enjoy making, which includes Xian language content in the past. And I'm a regular guest on Paul Shelley's Astro Historian Law System podcast.
And I'm Chris Harrow. I started learning the Xian directly after it was presented on CitizenCon in 2017. And I directly started by creating tools and learning materials. And then by finding out that there was no easy to writable font, I created one. And it was bought by CIG, and then they used it. And from then my journey started by creating other fonts and working with the linguist, Britton Watkins, and everything.
So you've actually gotten involved with CIG and helped them create the fonts for these languages?
Me, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we will talk about that soon. First, I think we should do a broad introduction. Actually, you know what? I was going to say of the alien races, but first, how about you both? How did you both get into Star Citizen? Was this something you did for other games before, or is Star Citizen what inspired you to get deeper into the lore and xenolinguistics?
Yeah, for me, it's Star Citizen. It's not really it's not like a game. It's more like a way of life. And I started in August 13, and from then on,
right when it started,
developed just a little bit after the Kickstarter campaign ended.
Okay,
I joined. Yeah, it was very early.
I think I joined a couple of years in. I was lured in by I was watching a lot of Scott Manley's Kerbal Space Program videos, and then I saw his content on Star Citizen, and that led me down a rabbit hole. But my relationship to it has been similar to when I was much younger. I was very much into Morrowind and the Elder Scrolls, and I was part of like modding communities, making like big mod projects as a hobby. So I've always had this tendency to end up going down the rabbit hole of trying to unpick the stories behind the stories and the other parts which are a deeper level than just the just the superficial level of the game. So
it means a lot when companies go a little deeper, or even a lot deeper, I guess, into creating some backstory and lore for the stuff, and makes it make sense. One of the things that I think it was the first time that I understood that these kinds of things, languages and different races and species in the game, could actually matter was when I started playing No Man's Sky. I think it was like 2015, 2016. And they had the thing where you could go and you could find a word, and it would translate that word for you so that whenever you came across it again, you would actually understand it. And that was the first time that I was just like, wait a second, this could be really, really cool for gameplay in a game that kind of goes all in on that aspect. And then I was like, oh, Star Citizen's doing that. What do you know? So I get where you're coming from when you get more involved in that, when you get into this game.
Yeah, I think there was a real moment for me when I'd played a lot of people would have played like Oblivion, Skyrim, Morrowind, And I played hundreds and hundreds of hours of it before realizing that the symbols around actually meant something, and the places were named in a way which meant something, and even the sort of like paper map that came in the box, you could see words written around that meant something, and you could go to that place in the world and find the place that was named that thing translated. And it was just like suddenly my entire my mind was blown, because I hadn't even realized that about a game that I thought I knew. And I wonder if that experience is going to be similar for some people with Star Citizen, if they're not aware of what a sign might say in an alien language.
There's so much detail packed into the game. You know, it's hard to see everything. You go through a city for the 100th time, and you're like, oh, there's a city map here. I didn't even know that. So I could totally see that happening. So let's start out with a little disclaimer, because you always need those when it comes to Star Citizen. Now, we're going to be talking about these languages being developed and all that kind of stuff, but going towards what Jale just said, this isn't necessarily something that's new to games, right? A lot of games will create languages and cultures and things for the alien races in them. Is that at least something that you guys know about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
Okay.
Some games, yeah.
And
I know even. Also, sorry, I know a game or I heard of a game where this central game mechanic is deciphering an alien language.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not a crazy thing to do. And the other disclaimer, because this is one that will pop up in the YouTube comments, of course, the people who are working on these languages and building out the lore and all that stuff aren't the same people who could be instead fixing bugs, right? And putting out more features for the next update. Yes. Okay, so whenever somebody wants to say that, just remember, they're not the same people this time. With all that being said, though, can we get for all the people who are just starting, maybe this is their first dip into the lore of this game, their first chance to learn about the alien species, can we get a basic rundown of the different species in this game, rather the basic, we'll say civilization level species, and how they compare to humans? If you guys want to just dish them out, however, I think there's 4 races, so however you want to do it.
Yeah, Chris, you pick one first, and then I'll take the next one.
So I think as I started with the Xi'an, it's my favorite race, and I'm starting to think of me as being a Xi'an slowly. Yeah. Also, the Xi'an, they're a very old race, and they are, because of their physiology, they get very old too. So like 300 to 400 years, and they started on the planet. They started being not the major race, or the alpha predator. So where they had to hide more, and they were hunted by prey. They were more the prey type. So they started being more cautious, and so all their whole behavior is more like they do more what's it called, diplomacy and everything.
Okay. Yeah.
And their society is more like it's like it's a matriarchy, where the so Jay, just add to you're more into the law than me if I said something wrong. And
no, it's all correct.
They have houses, and the males don't play the big role in their houses. It's more because of the matriarchy. The Xi'an, they have names for grandmother. So they are because they live so long, they stay around longer than for us. For us humans, it's like usually grandmother.
I mean,
for them, it's like 4 levels or 5 levels in the past.
It reminds me of real life. Grandma's in charge. You know, nobody acts out if grandma is in the room. Xi'an know what's up.
Yeah. And the Xi'an, because they are very old, an older race, they are have higher technological level and on the development. They even developed a special magnetic levitation technique, and because it was around so long for them, it's like normal. For example, the dishes on their meals, they float, and they don't use stairs and ladders. They have just, for example, the car to all. When you want to enter the ship, it just 5 discs leave the ship, float in front of you like steps, and then you just step on them and get into the ship, and then they float in, and you can go on.
Yeah.
And for example, they have elements on their clothing that's not connected to the actual clothes. It's like it's floating around your head, for example.
So,
Yes, I once asked what's the most gratuitous use of that technology they have, and Sherry said it was setting the dinner table. They can sort of do a thing, and then all the dishes just come out. And
Yeah,
I feel like that's there's a Disney movie that does something like that, with the witches and stuff. So they're kind of like the high tech race, like the gosh, I don't remember what the word. There's like an archetype that's used in sci-fi, but they're like the technologically advanced elder race, kind of. Yeah. Okay. So, and they have kind of interesting relations with the humans, right?
Yeah, basically, when the first contact was not very like two races met, and then they started diplomacy or thing, and it was more the way. I think it was miners or prospectors that created found a new jump point, and they found there as a planet that's very rich on resources, and then they started a settlement there, and wanted to get started prospecting and start mining companies getting there and everything. But then it was a Xi'an planet. They didn't know it, and when the Xi'an on of their fleet arrived there, they took the prospectors in the ship, and then they returned them to where they came from.
Right. And then we just kind of had a Cold War with them for a pretty long time, right? Like,
Yeah, I think because of the Mesa regime.
right. So,
And
no, go ahead.
yeah, and because of the Cold War, they had like what was the Perry line, a line of systems that was used as a buffer zone between the human empire and the Xi'an empire.
Right.
And one thing, what's funny for me is that because the whole Xi'an empire is not known to humanity, the extent how much the Xi'an empire big it is, and it's so from what is known currently, it seems like the Xi'an, like their fleet, for example, is like at least 10 times bigger than all the fleet of the UE. And the UE is boasting, you have your Cold War and the Perry Line, and every moment the Xi'an, if they wanted to, they could just come over and wipe us off the table.
Right. For the Xi'an, it's not a Cold War. They're just waiting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've always felt that the Cold War was rather one-sided. That the Messers wanted them to be this threat that the Xi'an weren't interested in being, but it was a useful boogeyman to justify. Oh, sorry, we can't build a school. We got to defend against, the Xi'an and stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely sounds like a Messer thing.
There was a funny point. I don't. Jale, do you know the name of the guy who was working like the opposition? He was wanted to get rid of the Messer regime, and secretly the Xi'an started diplomacy with him. Just to be sure.
Yeah, it was Terence Akari who was the senator for Terra, and he basically like snuck out and negotiated an end to the Cold War without consulting with the government. And it was in this period when the Messers were so in disarray. He just kind of went, I've got a peace treaty. go and sign it, please, because I've just negotiated peace. And it was one of the things that led to the downfall of the Messers.
Wow. Well, despite this Cold War that the Messers seem to want with the Xi'an, it's also one of the races that we actually share a lot of technology with, right? Misk uses a lot of technology from the Xi'an, and we have some of their manufacturers making ships that we can use. So, and I think is it the whole series that's really popular in Xi'an space, or is that Banu space that is popular?
I think it's popular in both, really. It's it appeals to Xi'an sensibility of a pure function. That,
Right.
They'll dedicate an entire planet to a specific purpose. So a ship that is so like perfectly balanced for just trade is it's kind of in their aesthetic.
Makes them salivate. Bread and butter.
And I have another anecdote. When Misk started their technology partnership with Xi'an, they sent a team of engineers and other company people to the Xi'an space to negotiate. And then when they entered Xi'an space, they had to find out that the Xi'an have a different way of handling criminals, for example, because the Xi'an they get so old. You can when somebody is doing a crime, you cannot put him into jail for his rest of his life because it's so long. So they tend to have the lesser crimes when they got sentenced. They it's more like they get a new work contract, and then they work as former criminals, and then they have to work their crime debt off. And there's even other like crimes syndicates or houses. I think it's like crime syndicates where when you enter Xi'an space, what the Misk delegation had to find out that there are criminal organizations that are they are legitimized by the Xi'an government, so they can do their stuff in this area of space if they're not too eager to stir too much up. Yeah, and the Misk delegation had to pay money to get to this area of space to their final destination.
Huh.
They're very puzzled.
There's a lot of complications that come up when you start living 3 times the age that we normally expect. So the Xi'an also are one of the most focused on races in the game. They have their own language. It's very built out. Like you said, you even helped to create the font itself for CIG. What is something that we can get from their language? What's something that the Xi'an language tells us about their culture or their race that might be interesting to people?
Oh, that many aspects. So when I talked to Britain, he told me that when he starts on the language of an alien race, he gets all the information the lore team created for this race, and then he creates aspects of the language and special things. Then he asks specific questions that come up when he develops things. He asked the lore team, what's with this aspect of society, or for example, of their, because they're living so long, how would be called, for example, a grandmother, because then the lore team they said to him, we didn't think of this aspect at all,
right,
so
yeah.
we have to create more lore. So this is working together to create more and more by each iteration.
I think that also, they really respect the fact you can't separate a language from a culture. They have to be developed in parallel.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like trying to develop an alien race without the concept art, or the concept art without an idea of what the race is going to be. So you get a lot of things, I think, about their personality from both Banu and Xi'an through their language. In Xi'an, there's no way to say that you're lucky. you can only say that you try and you were successful or not. Whereas in Banu, there's words to say that you're lucky and that you expressing hope. It's not explicitly stated in Xi'an, but it almost seems like there is no you don't hope that you succeed. You just try your best and do well and have ability, and you either will win or you won't. And I think that expresses a lot about their mentality.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And when you mentioned concept art for an alien race, it is especially important. For example, how their mouth part is formed, because when they have, for example, a beak or something, or like big teeth or something, when they don't have lips, if they couldn't close their mouth, they couldn't do any p sounds, for example. So you would have a language that doesn't have any p's in it, like the sounds. Because you don't have lips. Without lips, you can only do sounds like this.
Yeah, it only makes sense.
Yeah, so it's very interlocked with each other. The design, how they are looking, how their physiology is, and how their society is with the language. Yeah.
That's gonna be very cool. It's like one of those things that you mentioned, Jale, earlier. It might not be something that people necessarily notice because it's such a small detail, but once you know the knowledge that tells you that, and then you go back to like Xi'an space, being able to recognize that is really cool.
I think that the ultimate overarching thing with what the xenolinguistic stuff means from a game design perspective is understanding that 99.9% of people will never learn it to the level where they'll ever just like look at it and understand it,
right.
And probably like 99% of people won't even necessarily guess out the guide to work out what a symbol on a wall is. Instead, you got to think of it like painting with a particular color. It's the color that says this area is not necessarily for you. This area is exotic. This area is somewhere that is traveled by aliens, and therefore you should understand it like that. So if you want to surround the player with stuff that they essentially probably won't understand, you have that option. And it always comes down to this question of, will the aliens actually be speaking the alien languages? Well, they will, when they don't want players to necessarily understand what they're saying. And if they'll be speaking English, or UEE standard, when they do want you to understand it. And there'll be a translation when they want to show that the alien is very alien, but they want you to understand it. They have all those options available to them. And it's just giving them the tools to go, okay, do we want to ratchet up the alienation of the player by making the aliens more alien in this scene?
It adds a ton of context.
And the Xi'an have another aspect too, because they are getting so old. They have much more time to learn languages than humans usually. And humans can learn when they can speak like 4 or 6 languages. They are very language centric. But Xi'an can learn like 10, 20, 30 languages of even with different pronunciation aspect or local differences. Like, yeah.
That is.
Xi'an could speak Scottish, for example, without problems.
Even I can't speak Scottish. There's a couple of I think kind of meta points that they have written in. They say, yeah, there's a reason why a lot of Xi'an and a lot of Banu speak UEE standards, and then also with the Banu, it's their fragmented culture. With the Xi'an, it's their ancient homeworlds and so forth, or their houses' homeworlds that will have different dialects and accents. It's all just cover for the fact that the voice actors might all sound the same, essentially.
Yeah.
So they can kind of cover, that mispronunciation. It's not a mispronunciation. That's just how they say things on Lawa.
Yeah, it's their accent. Yeah. So actually, that brings up an interesting point. You're talking about how 99% of players really aren't going to learn this stuff. It's not going to make that big a difference. Do you think that they're not going to try and tie too many major aspects of the game into this? Like, do you see a mission happening, let's say Xi'an space, just to be the most extreme, where you practically can't finish the mission if you don't know how to read any Xi'an, or do you think there will always be a way to get around it?
I know that the tools exist. That's the thing. They've made the tools, and you can entirely make procedurally generated content which is going to spit out some Xian characters that you have to understand.
Right.
Even if it's just like the code to a lockbox. And you can do them in numerals versus in words. They can say the 1, 2, 3, and the digits 1, 2, 3 can be expressed two different ways. So they've given themselves the tools, but ultimately the writers don't design the gameplay. So that's always been their answer is, oh yeah, we'll work with the gameplay designers when they decide what's going to be fun, and they have the option to make missions that rely on understanding a Xi'an phrase, which of course you could look up, or understanding some other Xi'an characters, which could be done in a sort of somewhat randomized fashion. So someone has to treat it like a puzzle. And yeah, those puzzles will be easy to make. But then to actually, the fact is that it then draws upon this depth of language that they have developed. That is less of a gameplay consideration, I think, and more of a artistic and setting sort of consideration.
Yeah. How long are either of you aware of how long they've been working on Xi'an Alien, the modeling or the language or any of that stuff?
I thought it went back as far as 2014, but I might not be correct in that. I'm not certain. Chris, do you know better?
I don't have any dates when they started to create a language. But for example, I think Britain usually, I think it takes half a year to a full year to get the first iteration of the start of an alien language, I think.
Because it's just, I know a lot of people are waiting, right? People have been hearing about these aliens for a while, and everybody wants to, I don't think anybody expects to see them in Stanton, but everybody wants to, maybe get a peek here at ISC or some modeling and Star Citizen Live. And it does feel like CIG's definitely biding their time and trying to decide when the perfect time to show these would be, even if it's any time before the actual game comes out. But people are always asking, how long have they been working on these aliens? Where are they? Why haven't they shown us yet? And
the Xi'an, they certainly have a Xi'an character model rigged, and because that was featured in the monthly updates quite heavily in the character art section, sort of end of last year, and then it stopped being talked about, which implies, well, they're done with it. And we know that also that is in part for Squadron 42. Don't want to give any spoilers, but that they will feature there, so they were probably doing that work in aid of those scenes.
So there's something going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean,
as always,
they dropped the Banu model fairly, without much fanfare, really, when it was, what's it called, the reunion that you get to see the Banu in the sort of cryotube.
Yep. All the effects and everything. That was very cool. That was a nice little drop they did there. Speaking of which, shall we talk about the Banu next?
Sure. So, Banu were our first species we ever made contact with. They're an incredibly sort of capitalist-focused society. Well, with both Banu and Xi'an, it's kind of wrong to just attach the words that we use for our societies, because they are trade-focused, they're mercantile-focused, certainly, but they exist in a social structure that's entirely different to our own. So their entire society is built around these idea of su'ulis, which are best translated as sort of guilds, but they are a social structure wherein there's the boss, who's the Esso Su'uli, and then there's members of the Su'uli who are essentially almost like stakeholders, and then there are people who are indentured to the Su'uli. And this idea of indentureship is it's kind of their work contract society, but it ranges from everything from your salaried job to absolute kind of chattel slavery. There's no, and they originally they were kind of portrayed as being slave traders. I think they sort of tempered that by trying to say that it's almost more of like a criticism of capitalism in it. They sort of go, well, we look at the people living on Hurston and we look at how they're treated and we look at their contracts and we look at what their rights are. That's just slavery with more steps. So we'll just do the slavery. And so it's kind of an interesting social structure. And when you are born, you are immediately sold to a child rearing Suli, and they will raise you, and then you have to work off your debt to that child rearing Suli, and you'll be bought. Your then apprenticeship contract will be bought by another Suli, and you just end up working off these debts that are accrued through your life until you eventually you may be free of the debt to the Su'uli, and then you just start making money, and eventually you will reach an age of divestment, which is about 42 Earth years, and then you can you have sort of like a living wake, and then you are essentially retired, but can go on to politics and stuff.
Wow.
The interesting thing about the Banu, though, is that they have a very different approach to time and memory. They don't remember things that aren't important, and they don't consider it important to remember what their homeworld is. They don't consider it important to record history. They don't consider it important to remember who invented a thing. They just like to use the thing. So all of their technology is kind of cobbled together from different races because they just go, "Oh, that's cool. I'll take that. That's our idea now." They don't really have intellectual property rights.
It's a very absolute kind of way to live. And the Su'uli system is terrifying. I mean, it's essentially, it's very dystopian sounding. You can basically be passed back and forth between different people who own your debt for your entire life.
True, but they kind of view it as a privilege rather than a problem, because it comes with also that contract that you are signed up to will have provisions to look after you, and you will define your rights as an individual, and that is considered sort of inviolate. You can't violate those contracts. So you in a way will have more rights living in a Suli with a good contract than you would in the UEE as a general citizen.
Well, hopefully they're better with their contracts than landowners are nowadays, or rather your renter, whoever you're renting from, because sheesh.
Yeah, quite.
When your life depends on it. So the Banu are traders. They're mercantilistic. They the most famous ship that I think most players know of is the Merchantman, which is basically dedicated to all of this selling and trading and whatnot. How has that affected their relationship with us as humans? Are they pretty close to us? Do we get along with them? Do we butt heads? What's the story there?
Yeah, you get Banu living in human space. You get humans going to live in Banu space. You get people who want to make a lot of money. They'll sign up to a contract, an indentureship contract for a couple of years and spend some time in Banu's society. They've built the Merchantman is built around being kind of appropriate for different races to live in, not quite to the same level as the Ryland, but that's specifically there to be a multi-species ship. Then there's some characters in the lore who've done that, like Reggie, who is the linguistics expert who wrote the Banu language guide, spent a few years living with the Banu.
Yeah, the Rust Society guide.
Yeah, that's the one.
Mm-hmm.
And the Banu are very short-lived compared to even compared to humans. They only live to maybe 60 years old in our years. So they sort of live fast and kind of die relatively young. And they're as I say, their perception of time is slightly different. They don't think of things in terms of absolute time of there being, like, today is 26th of June, and where I'm sat, it's 6:15 in the evening. They wouldn't think of it in that terms. They would think of it in terms of, well, it's 20 beats since I had dinner, and they think of everything in terms of relative time. So there's no 3 days. Well, there's no 29th of June. There's only 3 days from now, and they describe all times in those kind of terms of relative to different points, durations, and periods, rather than them having like a calendar or a clock.
That is, I've the things I learned about the Banu, I think, are some of the things that interest me the most, and that might be because we have so much info about them. But like, I think I remember hearing that they just straight up don't have a word, or rather, they don't directly say that they're sorry. They'll be like, they'll disappoint you, and they'll be like, "It's unfortunate that you're disappointed."
Yeah,
but like not actually tell you that they apologize. That stuff is so funny to me. I can't help but always ask myself, will I get to encounter any of this in game? Because it's so cool. It's so interesting how it develops this stuff, but I also want it to matter, you know?
I forgot to mention another word they don't have. They don't have words for male and female because they don't have males and females. They have they are a uni-gendered society, and they there's some various interesting biological words one can use, but they're essentially in one state, and then when they want to have children, one of the partners will enter a separate state, and they still sexually reproduce, but they sort of elect. So it's kind of like with clownfish, where one of the clownfish will change to accommodate reproduction.
I was gonna say, I thought there was an animal kind of like that. That's interesting. So,
yeah, the best term from biology would be dioecious, which is actually a plant term, but because the other terms are a bit loaded, so I always go for dioecious, I think is the word.
Okay.
So what I want to mention another thing. What's funny with the relationship between humans and Banu, especially when they do trading contracts with them, because when a Suli, the head of the Suli, when he divests, then the Suli is not just destroyed, but
Disbanded, sort of.
Disbanded. Sorry, thanks. It's disbanded, and the contract the human company had with the Suli is nothing. You have to find a complete new Suli that does the same things for you, the same. For example, when you have a company that buys Banu defenders from a Suli that manufactures these defenders, when you have a look at defenders produced by Banu, no ship is the same like the other. There's not a production line with, for example, like anvil ships, where every ship is built the same from a blueprint.
Yeah.
Every Suli has its own way to creating these defenders, and they share the blueprints between each other. But everybody does his own specialty, and so when one Suli is specialized on building better shield generators, for example, these defenders would have better shield generators than defenders produced from another Suli. So it's very difficult to get the same quality ships as a human company from the Banu.
That also sounds a little scary. How things like your work could just end like that. It's like, I really hope that the whole Suli finding process isn't the same as getting a job for us, because I just imagine they'll be like, oh yeah, we'll hire you on to make merchantmen, sure. Oh, this is your first job, no problem, but you need at least 3 years experience making defenders. It's like the same things.
It's like you have to hire microtech programmers, and they call them on their Moby Glass. There's an app for it, the Suli Finder.
Yeah, seriously, like that, there must be a galactic app for that, because that sounds terrifying. Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say, Banu culture is definitely extremely chaotic in that sense, in a way that sort of Xi'an culture ends up being sort of too rigidly anti-chaotic. There's not enough flexibility, so they're kind of antipodean on those points.
Yeah, which is cool, and I really do hope that, and I think this is probably something that'll happen. You do get deeper and deeper into Banu space when that ends up becoming a thing. Maybe you don't get involved in these things, but you at least get like a mission where you have to help some Banu, maybe smuggle them out of the city because they decided to leave their Suli, and you get to like hear some of that backstory, and that's good enough for me. I'm excited to hear more about this as we play.
There's actually one hint of gameplay possibility in the Rust Society guide, which I can see them doing. I can see it being very possible. Was that you get better prices if you speak Banu,
right?
And the way you do that is you just have a trade terminal that shows you the things in Banu rather than the one which is showing it to you in English. So that wouldn't be that difficult to implement. And people say, "Oh well, I'll just learn those things," and I'm winning. Without having to learn the language. That's fine. That's still fun. That's still gameplay. That's all good.
Yeah, it's still requiring you to get deeper into it, which is cool. So both of these species that we've talked about so far, the Xian and the Banu, are kind of the two that are most. The Tavarin are a special case. We'll talk about them, but they're kind of the two that are most friendly and intertwined with humans, and thus know a lot more about what's going on in human space, and subsequently what's going on with us in Stanton as we play the actual game. And Star Citizen's finally at a point where it seems like they have enough going on in the game that they're willing to start mixing in more of this lore and introducing more of this stuff. So recently, for those who haven't known, we got 2 letters released that were written in Xian and Banu, and members of the community were able to translate these letters and present them to the rest of the community to kind of show what was going on and what these letters meant, an actual chance for these skills to go to use. Jale, I know you did some translations. Chris, I'm imagining you also got stuck into it. Would either of you, or maybe both of you, want to take turns, talk about what we got from these letters and kind of your thoughts on where you think CIG is going with releasing stuff like this and what they might do afterward?
Well, the 2 letters were about the same topic. They were about xenothreats and its impact on Stanton, but one from the Xi'an perspective and one from the Banu perspective. Both of us did a Xi'an translation of the Xi'an. Mine was a live stream, so when things got tricky, I just go, okay, put something down, move on. So Chris's translation is a lot better than mine. So yeah, it was sort of a government warning to watch out for xenothreat. They're coming for you, and it really reflected a lot of their suspicions about humans. Chris, do you want to talk more about it?
Yeah, and the letter was one part where they said that currently it is not known how much this hate against aliens spread inside the human society. So they hope that's not too much, but they currently don't know if it's a general problem for them that's growing and rising, or it's just a localized problem with this shitty group in Harrow. Yeah, because they're talking about them in some sentences. They're talking about them in the pejorative mood. That's a specialty of Xi'an. When Xi'an have like 9 verbs, but these 9 verbs can have 6 different levels of politeness. So you can, for example, you can say the xenothreat group, but you can say it in neutral mood with just like effect.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say it in pejorative, you say the same, but you mean these vile bastards.
Yeah, I get that. We all have those people in our lives. You can kind of tell.
And there are a couple of little lore pieces in there beyond that. So it revealed that there is a Chalpul Al-Sal, which is like an embassy on ArcCorp. And also, I think it had an interesting point in that from the Xi'an perspective, Pyro is a human system. So they consider Pyro and Stanton to be equally humans' responsibility to make safe.
Right.
And it was a little kind of hint of like, yeah, the UE aren't really doing a very good job. The fact that they have this, one of their systems, of course, it's not actually claimed by the UEE, but one of their systems is so overrun with pirates that they're not even controlling. They're not even legal pirates. Come on.
Right. Yeah. Oh man. See, just these little things, it's like, okay, is that like a little hint at possibly a dynamic event a few years down the line when the Xi'an decide that they're sick of like dealing with pyro? Because yeah, those things are great. The little lore drops like that. So a Xi'an embassy on ArcOrb also sounds pretty cool. That's very cool. So the Xi'an gave out a warning that was pretty straightforward and very open with their suspiciousness towards us. Do all humans suck, or is it just these ones? Spoiler alert, we all suck. And was pretty protective. How about the Banu letter? That one was a little bit more recent. In fact, I think just the last few days.
Yeah. So the Banu letter was translated by a member of our UEE Linguistic Institute. His name is Corvus, and so he's currently our leading expert on Banu, because I'm more specialized on Xi'an currently. And for when he did the translation, I supported him by transcribing the text, the Banu text that was just a posted image, to the actual SRP writing. And
we can we can link the whatever his original post was. We can link that in the show notes here if people are interested. Yeah,
sure. I can show you the PDFs we created for the translation. Sorry, what I wanted to say is, and I created I quickly created my first iteration of the Banu Dictionary App, where you can just put in the words and get a quick translation. You don't have to search in the original document for the meanings. Yeah, and I can provide you a link with these for these apps too, so members from the community can do their own translation. Attempts.
Yeah, my translations were also heavily powered by Chris's tools, because before those we would have just CIG's list of words, and then you might have a text document for all the words they haven't listed but are in the language, and you'd be just Control F, find word. And then Chris made a dictionary, which made that process a lot faster, and then also this basically drop in the whole sentence and it will look it up. It's not the same as auto translation though, because it still takes an extensive deconstruction of the grammar and understanding of the context, and also understanding some overlapping words to do a translation.
Okay. Do you guys think we'll ever be at that point where we could just Chris, for instance, your app could just auto translate a sentence?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Because when you have like apps like Google Translate, they are working with machine learning, and they have a huge library of text to train these AIs. But we don't have, like, we have 3 or 4 texts in Xi'an, and this is not enough to create a model that does all the translation for you. So I don't think this will be possible in the near future.
Also, I think people maybe underestimate how different the grammar is from English, because a lot of people study 1 or 2 European languages. If they speak English, they will have also. If they speak English as their first language, they may have learned Spanish, French, German, and if you grow up speaking German, you've likely learn some English, and so forth. Those languages aren't a million miles away from each other.
Right.
They have a lot of shared roots, and to a large extent, yes, we have differences of grammar, we have differences of how we construct our sentences, but the fundamental thoughts are kind of have similar elements. There are verbs and there are nouns and there are adjectives. Whereas when we talk about Xi'an, those parts of meaning are not contained in the same words. They're not contained. There is no such thing as really, or as very rarely, an adjective and how we think of as verbs is not constructed in the same way. There are only 9 verbs, or is it 7 or 9? I always
9.
forget. 9. There's 9 verbs, and then every other verb in the entire universe has to be constructed in a different way. So it's not the case that we can just sort of swap words around like you get with some conlangs, such as Klingon kind of works that way. It's kind of under the hood is kind of some fun words on top.
Mm-hmm.
It requires a complete conceptual reconstruction of a sentence in order to translate it.
Right. This is a completely new, and it's crazy to think that, like, to create the language, they had to think about that from the ground up. How can we distance it that far from languages that other people can recognize? It's really cool. Just the whole practice, honestly.
I think a lot of the basis is on. I think a lot of the concepts come out of Mandarin for Xi'an, and I'm not so sure on the grammatical basis for Banu, but it does certainly have some tricks which were deliberately constructed to be, as Britton said, he didn't know of any language that did certain things that Banu did. He was trying to think of something completely original, and those elements are good. Of course, these languages do end up having some roots in real-world languages, partly because it's very, very difficult to be completely 100% original,
Sure.
and partly because also there's a concept called a phonemic inventory, which is the collection of sounds in a language. And the collection of sounds in a language is, they have to worry about having voice actors. So, fact is, it's a lot easier to have a voice actor who to keep a phonemic inventory that has a basis in a parallel parallel Earth language, so that the voice actors could have a starting point.
Yeah, they have a basis.
Yeah, so the sounds of Xi'an are largely based in sort of Chinese and Indo-Chinese languages, and the sounds of Banu are very familiar from, say, Swahili, because that gives you a good starting point.
Okay. So the Banu letter that came out after the Xi'an letter was it generally the same kind of tone? Mostly warning.
Not especially. While the Xi'an, the letter was more about the members of the Xi'an Empire. The more the leaders are warning their citizens to be careful and where they can get help and where they could find they could hide. And in the Banu letter, it's more like, yeah, here we are the Sonar Soli, and we are especially good at fighting alien other combatants, and then you have to hire us. We can protect you, and then so basically it's like a sales pitch for protection.
Yeah, very capitalistic, very Banu.
Yeah,
cool. Well, let's move on then to the more hostile alien species in the game. One that a lot of people just think of one that a lot of people think of as the big baddies, and I'm sure many in the UEE would like to have you think they are the big baddies, but they are dangerous, and they're known as the Vanduul. Now, I don't know if we have a language for them or anything like that, but is there deeper knowledge that we do have about the Vanduul that maybe isn't that common? How they live, what their drive is, why they even matter in the game? Could you guys give people who don't know, I guess, a good introduction on them?
So what I can say is there are parts that I'm not allowed to talk about.
Okay.
So yeah, basically I can say sure there is they have a language, and because they have to have language to have a society.
That would be important.
And but this language is not known to humans or to Xi'an or to other races, because they are so hostile. They don't negotiate. They don't do diplomacy. They just attack and kill and take their share they want to have. So there's communication directly with them. So there's not too much we know. What we know, for example, of Banu, they some Banu Suli do trade with Vanduul, for example. So that's for example, they could have like technology that originated from Vanduul.
It might be safer if I answer the questions about Vanduul, because I don't have any insider knowledge, so
Don't have to
I
tiptoe.
only know what's publicly available anyway.
Right.
So Chris can sort of confirm based on that, because they also have their, as I say, their language has been developed for quite a long time because they've got to record all the bits for Squadron 42. Their script was originally based on the idea of what one could scroll with a claw. So that was done by Brenton Watkins, had put tinfoil over like a pan and was making shapes of what he could scratch.
He even created claws. He built claws to scratch this aluminum foil to create the
that is
basic set of letters. Yeah.
That's so cool.
And another little feature of that, which was an old idea, I'm not sure if they followed through on this, was that, and I think this comes a little bit from Star Trek. Each letter began as the sigil of one of their clans, and then they became their language through essentially people associating a letter with a clan, and then essentially evolved into a letter.
Okay.
So I think it kind of is maybe a reference to Darmok, the classic xenolinguistics episode of Star Trek, where you have Picard on a planet with someone who the universal translator can translate the words he's saying, but not the memes, and everything being a reference to a classical hero. So the idea of like crossing a river would be, was it like Darmok on a boat with Jalad or something like this? Because it's referencing a story from their legends. It'd be like if you to say somebody got shot, you would be saying like, oh, Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, as like that's the way that you say someone got shot.
Okay, so you wouldn't have all the words in there.
Yeah, well, I think that they might be referencing that a little bit by saying that the letters mean individual clans in the past.
Okay. So the Vanduul are probably the most mysterious alien race to us as humans in the game. We've never really had a chance to be diplomatic with them. Well, besides I think maybe you're thinking the Kurthak. I'm not sure. Or
yes.
Yeah.
They're
so
more mysterious.
Right. So I never know how to approach them, but in terms of like these main three that we interact with, or I guess there are four, the Tavarin, which we'll talk about after this. The Vanduul seem to be the ones that we can't really get to learn much about.
Yeah, currently, I mean, we only got their language from essentially in lore. We got it from capturing this capital ship of theirs, which is also, I think, where we get all of the glaives in existence that were captured were from this one captured ship, and we had to back translate from there, but it took years and years to work out from the top minds at the University of Moscow were the ones working on that.
Okay. Cool. Well, the Vanduul are they didn't put out a letter because they don't care about a Xeno threat, so we won't talk about that. But they are the third race, the big baddies. After them, though, are the Tavarin, who we've mentioned a couple times now today. And the Tavarin have a very interesting story. Who would like to take on their little introduction?
I think, Jale, you are more proficient.
Sure, we've covered it quite extensively in Lore System podcast, people who want to get deeper on it. But we essentially, soon after discovering the Xi'an, we discovered this race who had they'd yet to discover jump points. So they were I think they had yet to discover jump points, but they were certainly suffering from being overpopulated and having very little space left in their home system. And they hadn't discovered any other aliens, and we discovered them. And it's a little bit controversial what happened next, but basically we ended up at war with them. They were trying to invade us in order to take our planets for them to grow into. Then there's Tavarin. We won the war, somewhat narrowly, actually, because we hadn't really needed a strong military up until that point. But we had to very quickly develop the doctrines for interstellar war. And then we occupied their homeworld, and that's when we became the UEE, because out of that war, a war hero basically took over as a fascist dictator. And then there were holdout elements that had sort of run off at the end of the war, and they came back with a vengeance about 40 years later, and we had a second war, and that was a war basically to try and reclaim their homeland, and they failed at that. And they failed so badly that they just ended up, the entire fleet just suicided itself into the atmosphere of their homeworld. And the cultural devastation that this caused, this kind of hopelessness, caused them to essentially tear down their temples, burn their books, and just sort of go, look, we've built. So they were very kind of like built around a sort of warrior code and a religion that was all about their personal honor, and they fought 2 wars based on these principles, lost devastatingly, and just went, this entire culture just clearly isn't working. We're going to burn it down. And the only things we ever kept of theirs were essentially the things that the humans had stolen from them and put in their museums. And they became a very kind of dissolute people. They were a lot became criminals, a lot sort of spread throughout the empire doing dirty work and evil work. And only recently has there been a sort of resurgence in an idea of like proud Tavarin. So you got people like Suj Kossi, who was came up through the military and was became a citizen, which is a hard thing to do for a Tavarin, and became a senator and has been the first alien senator.
The Tavarin have a sad story. It's seriously, it's crazy to think of in an entire species just kind of being like, well, let's just erase this all. Like that's wild to me. And that's yet another part of the lore that I really do hope lives on in the game that we can explore, because that's a crazy story. And the fact that they were assimilated into the UEE and made to live alongside the people who wiped them out, just all sorts of storylines I can see coming off of that. We don't really, do we know much about a language from the Tavarin?
Well, they weren't part of the original stretch goal for alien languages. So when Xian came out and the question was like, okay, are we going to get to Tavarin? The answer was, we'd like it, but we can't guarantee it. And then it seems like the answer to that question has evolved over time to more of a when we get it. So it's not perfectly guaranteed, but I think that it is on the cards. Chris will almost certainly know more. I can see a little smile on his face. And
little cheeky smile.
And you can see that there's thoughts about Tavarin in some of the other language documents. So in the Banu guide, they talk about how the Banu learned the word Tavarin from us, so it's Tefarino, because if they had learned the word Tavarin from how Tavarin say it, it would be like Tefrin, with like a really long sort of E sound.
Okay.
So it's certainly implied that there's some thought about it going on.
Okay.
Sorry, I have another small thing I want to add. Basically, the Vanduul learned the name of the race of humans by contacting a trade partner of the Banu. So they when they encountered humans, they didn't know that we call us humans. They learned this afterwards from the Banu.
Okay, so they were communicating with the Banu.
Yeah.
Is this hot lore?
I think if I read it in the lore, it's be public.
Public. Somewhere off in the distance where nobody can find it. Public. Well, that's a very interesting little fact, actually, because I never even thought about the fact that we would be able to discern things of alien races based on how they communicate in words that we technically didn't teach them. That's just all kinds of complicated.
I mean, we can tell things about human language from the way that they communicate, because humans don't speak English. They speak UE standard, which is kind of a lot of English, but plus 900 years of like melding and evolution.
Yeah.
And within Xi'an, you get loan words from humans. So you get like the word madman is kind of like their maman, which is like YOLO. But you also have words from French, from Japanese, from Spanish that have become loan words in Xi'an, kind of implying that humans are still using those words, or that they're part of UE standard.
Right, yeah. They're getting passed over.
One thing came just to my mind when you mentioned these loan words from humans, and not even loan words. The Xi'an even got a complete concept from us, because before the Xi'an contacted the humans, they didn't have a concept of shopping. They learned from humans that you can go somewhere and just enjoy buying things, and then they create the word shopping is shopping.
Huh? They didn't get that from the Banu?
Yes, from us.
From us.
I don't know if it's known whether they knew the Banu before they knew us. I think they met the Banu through us. So
okay.
I'm not certain on that though.
Humans, the kings of shopping. So happy to be spreading that throughout the verse.
Their approach to commerce natively is more to within their yuwa, which is these houses, which are kind of almost like nations or corporations. They procure everything that is needed for the people who live within them. So, and then you're essentially requisitioning what your little family wants. So you don't go clothes shopping. You would just requisition what your house has procured from a clothes suli. Sorry, not a clothes. Well, could be from a clothes suli or from a clothes yuwa. And then you go, right, that's your. It's sort of like an internal communism and an external sort of business to business trade or international trade.
That's a lot. It's interesting how deep the cultures go, like how much thought is put into them. So real quick, before we wrap things up, as a little extra bonus of aliens that we're looking at, the one that we did mention a little while ago, the one that I know absolutely nothing about, other than that it's a little distant from humans, and I won't put Chris too much on the spot. I don't want to make you trip up on anything you can't say, but could you guys give the listeners a little rundown on who the Kurthak are? Because they are almost never mentioned or talked about. I actually don't think I've ever seen them in anything other than maybe, like several years ago in a forum.
So I can safely say I didn't do anything on the Kurthak to work on anything with them. But what I know from lore that's published is that the Kurthak are basically from the spatial standpoint, their empire is from a human empire of humans on the other side of behind the Xi'an empire. So we don't have any contact points with the Kurthak. So we would have to fly through the Xi'an space to meet the Kurthak. So there are some diplomats or some government guys wanted or thought about to make contact with the Kurthak, and the Xi'an are very, very sensitive about this topic, so they wouldn't allow any other races to try to contact the Kurthak. And because the Kurthak, they are the Xi'an Empire and the Kurthak Empire, they are like at war for over 300 years. So it's a very long time where they're fighting, and it's more like a religious war.
Which is scary, because knowing how much we are overpowered by the Xi'an military, to think that another species is holding them back for 300 years is like, oh boy, we're small.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to know about them. One is that they've said in an interview, I think last year's Alien Week, the Kurthak are very much sort of they're on the shelf baddies for the future. They're not telling us anything because it's not for us to worry about for now. but they want it. They have this ability then to introduce a new big baddie, but it's been foreshadowed. And I think the second thing that was really interesting about them, which is really the only other thing we've ever learned about them, was from last year's Alien Week Xi'an letter, was that they really know how to hurt the Xi'an. And that was a letter all about from the middle of these wars called the Spirit Wars, and the Cathak came in and destroyed this this naval base where it was all the people who were all the young Xi'an that were just about to join the military for their mandatory service period. And they just wiped it out, and they used this terminology of made bones of the station, which means like to completely destroy. And it wasn't just that they were killing off military assets, and it wasn't just that they were killing off people. They were killing off the futures of those houses by killing their young. And it was a real sort of stick the knife in and twist it moment in those wars.
And the Cathak will do what needs to be done.
They seem pretty ruthless.
Yeah, I can see that being, obviously we're in the ages of quarterly updates that don't really have much theme to them yet, but once the game is quote unquote live and we're getting these maybe major once a year themed updates, I could totally see the Cathak being introduced, kind of the same way the Thargoids were in Elite Dangerous. Mm-hmm. Scary though.
Yeah.
They sound scary. Well, that wraps up just about all of the species in the game that are, at least that I know of, that are a civilization. Yeah.
There's one race called the Hadesians that went extinct,
yes.
where you can still find like artifacts or tombs or lost cities.
There are a few of those sort of sci-fi tropes that I'm still waiting for. The sort of we called the Xi'an the elder species, but kind of like the ancient, all-powerful species that has passed away, and now we find their ruins and stuff. I'm still waiting to see if there's anything like that. And then we also have aliens that aren't necessarily, I don't know the term you would use for it, but they aren't spacefaring. They aren't what we would call intelligent. The pyro crab, the stormwall space whale, and things like that. Obviously, there are other aliens in the game, and I know a lot of people will have problems that all of the aliens that we interact with are humanoid, but it just makes sense. It makes sense for the game.
And another thing from the early past of this conception or the development of Star Citizen, I think there was a stretch goal or some things mentioned in the lore that there's will be plans to have an alien civilization that in the game, when the game is live, a player will do first contact with them. So
that would be fun.
Something else out there.
Yeah. So there will be other stuff, but this has been sort of the original setup for the aliens, their languages, their cultures, and kind of a way for people to wet their beak a little bit. But as Jale has mentioned multiple times throughout this show, the Star Citizen Lore podcast that is put on by Astro Historian Paul Shelley, the Astropub, is a great chance to check out more lore every single month, multiple times a month. Sometimes I go on there sometimes, but mainly it is Jale, Algorid, and Paul really throwing it down. I don't know the lore like these guys, but definitely check that out. It's on all of the same different podcast platforms that we are. It's on YouTube, so give that one a search. But before we wrap things up here, Jale and Chris, if you guys would like to let everybody know where they can find all of your content and any other last words, please feel free.
You can find me on Twitter and you can find me on YouTube.
Yeah, if you can find me on Twitter and on our Discord, we have a website called ueexi.com, where you find the Discord invite link and all the links to the tools and learning materials. Yeah, you can just, if you're interested in learning languages, come to our Discord server and then we can have you.
If you want to get beaten up by lore, Star Citizen is just such a big game. Has something for everybody. Even the lore is deep. So, thank you both for being here. Thank you, everybody, for coming and listening. If you have on our audio platforms, which are ad-free, or on YouTube, if you are more interested in watching. This has been episode 57 of the Launch Sequence. I'm your host, Keenan, and I will see you all next week.
That's very cool.